Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Adobe XD Masterclass. My name's Howard Pinsky, Senior XD Evangelist here at Adobe, and I hope you're all doing well on this fancy Friday. We've made it through another week, and we're on Masterclass number 45. We've been at this for 45 weeks. And a big thank you to everyone who has tuned in for all 45 masterclasses. Couldn't thank you enough. If you're tuning in live, let me know in the chat who you are and where you're tuning in from. If you're tuning in on Twitter and you want to chat along and ask questions, head on over to behance.net/Adobe Live so I can see all of your amazing faces. We've got Miroslav from Poland and Cody and Jack and Amer and Marsha from Toronto in the house, Cornell, Umacorn, Mohammed, and Wade. Wade's asking, does Fancy Friday include dancing? Hey, knock yourself, I won't be dancing. But Wade, if you want to dance, go for it. Film it and let me know on Twitter. Masayu and John from the Netherlands, and Anita from Toronto, Brett from Toronto, well, Hamilton, close enough. Great to see all of my fellow Canadians in the house. Umacorn says, yes, Howard Pinsky will show us his moves during the stream. I will not. Not gonna happen. Christine, great to see you. Andres from Germany, Mohammed from Saudi Arabia. Awesome. People from all over the world. I love it. All right, let's go ahead and hop over to my screen and we are going to dive in to today's masterclass. If you follow me on Twitter, or if you've been watching the last, I would say 3 masterclasses, you know that I've been building out this desktop-based dashboard experience. And I've been also tinkering a little bit with the dark version of this. It's changed a lot since I posted this, what was it, yesterday? Yesterday. Designs change a lot in just one day. So I'll show you the dark mode at some point in the future. It's not ready just yet. I want to tweak it a little bit more, but you know, I've been kind of working at this and it's getting there. But we're going to be continuing the light version that we started we started the dashboard last masterclass. And then the previous masterclasses, we were working on the onboarding experience. And Miroslav is saying, just to remind you to explain instances with components in repeat grids. Yes, I will absolutely be working on a repeat grid at some point during this class. But if not, I will definitely make sure to talk a little bit more about that. So last masterclass, we started building out this very simple dashboard. I'm going to make sure actually to group some of these elements and make sure it's centered because it's bothering me that it's not. I'm going to name this dashboard. And if anyone else has questions about XD as I'm going through this process, definitely throw them in the chat on Behance and I will take a look. All right, so last masterclass, we started building out this dashboard and we have a few containers, a few rectangles. Then we have on the left-hand side here, we have our menu and we used stacking in Adobe XD right over here on the right in the properties inspector. So if we need to, we can always dive in here and swap the position of any of these links, or if we need to add additional ones and duplicate, right, it's going to automatically shift down. And this one down here, the settings, we manually overrode the padding, excuse me. All right, so, and then over here, we started the process of building out this additional container on the right, which shows what your wallet looks like in this particular application. And at the top right-hand corner, there might be a way, and maybe we'll build this out as a component at some point to switch between different wallets, right? So we stopped over in this area here. We have these buttons, and if I'm not mistaken, we did enable a stack in the properties inspector, and we have a stack in a stack, so we can swap the position, of these buttons if we need to, right? Or we can swap the position of these buttons. Or if we decide to make some of them longer, right? The ones below it move really nicely. All right, but we do have a few additional areas down here that we need to clean up a touch. So this area here, this first field, we may want to put maybe your wallet's address, for example. So I'm actually going to dive over here. I have on my clipboard just a text layer and a wallet. I'm going to press the T key on my keyboard to, Marsha's saying, I miss Let's XD. I don't like the format as much on Adobe. Yeah, so long story. I'll talk more about that in the future. Let's XD is now transitioning to an internal page on adobe.com. It makes sense, but they're working on a few tweaks and user experience things. So we'll talk more about that in the future, but they're working behind the scenes to fix a few things and improve some stuff. So we'll talk more about that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I am inside of this group, grab the text tool. I'm going to paste this address. Now, I have the Font Awesome the typeface right now. Probably not going to work, right? So I'm going to go for, let's say, Sophia Pro. That's probably a little bit better. We've been using Josephine Sans for some of the typefaces, for some of the labels, right? It's interesting. It has a nice feel to it. It's got a fun style, but in the most part, you probably want to stick with more of a traditional typeface. So I may switch out these typefaces at some point. And I love Sophia Pro. I also love Avenir Next. If I could spell it correctly, Avenir, there we go. Avenir Next, also very traditional, very nice. It works, right? So now obviously this wallet address is way too large. It doesn't fit in that box. And if I were to make it small enough that it did fit in that box, it would be very small and hard to read, right? So what you'll find a lot is that, especially with addresses like this that are very long, is that only some of it is shown. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to use this rectangle here, which I'm going to just call address. We're going to use that as a mask. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to drag it on up above the text layer. And inside of the properties inspector, I'm going to select both of those. Sorry, the layers panel. I'm going to select both of those, object, and then mask with shape. If you're on Windows, right click, mask with shape. Lorenzo is saying, is there a way to disable artboard navigation with arrows? So one thing you can kind of do to get around that is add, in prototype mode, you can actually add key triggers, and you can basically have arrows do nothing. That's one way around it. If you're sharing it for user testing, for example, so if you're in share mode and you select user testing, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that does disable any sort of navigation. But, you know, it depends on what you're doing, right? If you're just in Adobe XD, try out the, the prototype method with the arrows. That might work. Someone's asking, are we working on data visualization soon in the future DC or Masterclasses? Possibly. Definitely possibly. All right. Now, what you're noticing is because I have a border on this particular shape in the background that is on the inside, right? It's cutting, it looks a little bit strange there. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to grab the mask. If I can find it, where are we? I'm going to grab that mask and just bring it on in a little bit. And on your keyboard, if you hold down your command key and use the arrow keys, you can actually enlarge or shrink shapes, right? And if you hold down shift, you can do it 10 pixels at a time. So I just brought that in a tiny little bit, and that looks quite a bit better. I'm going to go ahead and press play at the top. And it's a little bit large actually. But what the nice thing is, and let me just name this address, is I can just grab this text layer and make changes and make it a little bit smaller, and the mask will not be affected, which is wonderful. And I have been saving some colors in my assets over there to the left, and I think that could do. I might want to bump up the weight a tiny bit to about medium, right? And just shift it on over a touch. And like I always mention, whenever you're designing zoomed in, just hit the play button at the top. That way you can see what things are looking like. Because when you're zoomed in, you lose perspective of how things are looking. And I might want to make this a little bit longer actually. So I'm going to select some of this information here. Maybe just 1 pixel. Nothing too crazy, right? And I might want to do the same thing for this. Make this a little bit longer and wider. Make sure it lines up. And do I have any guides set up? I don't think I have any guides set up. So I'm going to go over here to the left-hand side. I'm going to drag out a guide just to help me, especially when I'm zoomed in like this, just to help me line all these elements up. And I'm going to make sure to distribute these. Bam. All right. So now we have these 2 additional squares over here to the right. And one of them might be to copy this particular address to your clipboard. And another user experience that you could potentially do is, if someone just clicks on this field, it would copy to the clipboard. Now, you have to think about who your audience is. Will they understand that? In some cases, they may not. So in this case, we're going to go for a simple copy button. I'm going to go into my plugins panel at the bottom left-hand corner. And I do have the icons for design plugin installed. And we're going to go just type out copy. And of course, if you have additional icons, I'm going to be using some icons from Font Awesome at some point. You can grab those as well. So I'm going to grab the feather icon here. It's a nice, simple, fairly universal copy icon. And of course, as I shrunk that down, the border remained the same size. So I'm going to just drop that to about 2, possibly. Yeah, it's a bit thick still. Maybe 1.5. That could do. And back in my assets, I am using this color here for this address. So I'm going to right click and apply as border color. Very good. And then the one over to the right, this might be to display your QR code. So let's go ahead and hop into Nucleo for a second. It's a third-party icon manager. And let's see if there are any icons. Ooh, I can't spell. QR. Oh, there we go. There's some from Font Awesome. There's a few more from others. Font Awesome could potentially work. We are going more or less border-based. So I will copy this one here. I'm going to paste it. Now, these icons are very large, and they also work as typefaces. So if you do have, see, basically this one says QR code in the info. So what I could do is grab my text tool, type out QR code, and then switch this over to Font Awesome 6. There it is. And looks pretty good, right? So you can do that as well. But I'm going to go ahead and just use this. It is SVG, so it's nicely editable. And I'm going to sample my color, or again, you can grab it from the assets. All right, Cornell's asking about battle tags. I think I saw something about Diablo 2 Resurrected earlier. Very excited for that, but that's a conversation for another day. All right, so that's looking pretty good. We've got our copy button. We have our QR code, which I'll make a little bit larger. Right there, look at that. Fits perfectly in that little square. And I do want to make sure that I'm keeping all of this nicely organized inside of my layers. This will be called QR, and this one over here, group. This will be copy. And we've got our address. Very good. And I'll group those two. And the only reason I'm grouping those two as well is so that if I do decide to enable a stack, which I can call this one bottom row, or maybe just address row, I can turn a stack on. It's going to define it as a horizontal stack because that's the direction those particular items are being laid out. And I can dive in and just swap them around. So if I wanted the QR code first, probably wouldn't make sense in terms of user experience, but you can certainly do that. All right, so this section is now looking pretty good. And again, we have a stack enabled so we can move these around as needed. Now, down below, we may want a very simple separator to separate this top section, which is more or less an overview of your wallet, and then the bottom section, which might be your transactions. So I'm going to grab the line tool, shortcut key L, and I'm going to go outside of this buttons group, drag one out, and you're noticing because I have a stack enabled, or a padding enabled on this overall container, as I'm moving things around, it's growing nicely. I'll make it a very subtle line. That could potentially work. Maybe a little bit more subtle. There we go. And then right down below, we may want to kick off this section with a title. So I'm going to grab the text tool one more time, type out wallet, whoops. I still have the Font Awesome typeface enabled. Let's go back to Josephine Sands. Now I do have up at the top here, I did use it for this header. It's probably gonna be a little bit different, so I'm not gonna apply that character style. We are gonna do something a little bit different in this one, and I'm going to actually, let's go for uppercase for these particular titles, and we'll bump this up a little bit to about 16. I think bold could work, and I think this color, I think that could work as well. I would consider probably darkening it a little bit, just so that it's really stands out. There we go. All right, now down below here, and this could be where we might start talking about repeat grids and components to answer Miroslav's question. Possibly. This is more of a simple repeat grid, but we're going to start the process of creating our repeat grid, and this is going to be displaying all the different transactions. So with the ellipse tool, shortcut key E, I'm going to drag one out. Again, padding is doing its thing. And for now, I'm just going to simply set it to a nice gray color. We're going to add some images in there in a moment. And then over to the right beside this ellipse, we may want two pieces of information. What exactly you did, or what exactly the transaction was, and the date. So I'm going to click, and let's go ahead and type out received Ethereum, right? Make this smaller. And this is where your style guide might come into play. Do you stick with Josephine Sands, which is, again, a more stylized typeface for these particular areas in this information, or do you go for something a little bit more traditional, right? So up here, we did switch over to Avenir Next. So I think I'm going to stick with that. And 9 could work, possibly. We might want to bump this up a little bit, because that might be too small. And I'm going to drop this to about medium, possibly, maybe semi-bold. We'll see what that looks like. And Mohammed is asking, what's the difference between padding and stacks? So stacks will allow you, if I dive into this group here with all the buttons, stacks will allow you to move and swap positions of items, right? And if I duplicate this to add an additional one, it'll push everything down below. Padding, if I click on the overall group right over here that contains all this information, I only have padding enabled. I don't have stacks. If I organize this a little bit better, I can absolutely enable a stack, but right now I just have padding. And what that's doing is it's keeping 32 pixels in this case all around this container. So what you're noticing, as I am selecting objects and moving them around, I can even move them to the left, it's nicely organized, or it's stretching out that background container, and it's remaining at 32 pixels on all sides. Of course, I could dive in and change this to 24, or I can change it on an individual basis, and it'll remain at those values as I'm designing. So that's a very short explanation of what the difference is. So we've got our first bit of information. I'm going to duplicate this downwards, and let's go for, what day is today? March 12th, 2021. We're already halfway through March. That's crazy. I'm going to drop that in size, and you know what? I'm going to probably go for demi-bold for this one. I'll stick with medium here because it's a smaller typeface. I probably don't want to go regular or below. It might be a little bit difficult to read, but I think that looks pretty good. Demi-bold and medium should work well. I would even consider going to bold. Interesting. I don't know. So let me move this over. Let me know in the chat, bold, which is right now for the header, or demi-bold. I'm thinking maybe bold. Let's stick with that for now. And you will all tell me what you think in the chat. There we go. Someone's asking about, I think someone was asking about how do you transition your apps or your app designs and your website designs to a fully functioning something or other, right? At the moment, you got to work with developers. There are some plugins, like some people are mentioning inside of the chat, that some of the plugins will definitely help with that process. But you know, it's very difficult to convert design to code and have it work immediately. You're definitely going to have to work with a developer to, you know, bring that to life. So bold, 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 demi, bold, demi. It's mostly bold, I think, but there's a lot of demi. But the nice thing is we're going to be working in a repeat grid. So we will easily be able to change that across everything. Now, one more thing I might want to do is over to the right, actually show the transaction. So I'm going to duplicate this over here, have it snap with this guide, right? And make sure it's in the center. And this, because it's going to be on the right-hand side, I definitely want to right align it. So I'm going to go ahead and press that. And this might be, let's say we'll do plus to indicate that you are receiving something, your balance is going up. And we'll do like 1.5 ETH, right? I wish someone sent me 1.5 ETH, but that's beside the point. Now this one, I might want to bump this up a little bit, and we might want to go demi-bold. I don't know if we want to go bold because that's more for the header, but then again, the amount you're receiving or sending might be just as important as what exactly it is, right? So you might want to go bold in that case. And you may even want to bump this up in size a touch. Not that one, this one over here. Boop, boop. Possibly. You want to make sure that people can see it. And I think that could work. So we have all the information that's going to make up this particular cell of the repeat grid. So what does, Marcia's asking, what does ETH stand for? So it is Ethereum. It's one of the cryptocurrencies, kind of like Bitcoin, but different network, different functionality. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to select all this information, 1, 2, 3, 4, And at the top right-hand corner, we have our repeat grid button. And all together now, boop. All right, there we go. And now what we're able to do is we're able to drag out a few more down this artboard. And again, because I have padding enabled, look at that. Fancy, right? The background just resizes beautifully. There we go. Now, it might be a little bit too crammed down there. And that's kind of where, your design direction will come into play. Do you want to reduce the padding around this particular container? Possibly, right? Right now we have it set to 32. We might consider maybe 24. And that just brings everything in, gives us a little bit more room. And we can stretch this out a touch. Move this thing over a little bit. Take a quick peek. Let me actually go ahead and bring this on up. Make sure that's 22, and now we have 24 on this side. And of course, you can also add padding to the overall container, this one over here on the left, so that, it adjusts this. But let's not complicate things right now. All right, and this is 31, so we have a little bit of room down there. We can stretch this out a touch more, right? 27. 23, almost. We almost got it. That's okay. We'll work on it. And for now, we're going to leave some of these transactions as is. We're definitely going to add some content later. For example, what we can do is hop into Finder, and let's say you have these images here. Drag them in, and boop, it just populates the entire grid. You can do the same thing with text documents as well. But I want to make sure that we have time for some more goodies. So what we're going to do, I'm going to tweak this design a little bit. When you don't use, so I think Tiago's asking, when don't you use padding on buttons? And I think the simple answer is for situations like this, right? Where you have 2 buttons or 3 or 4, whatever it might be, and they are inside of a container that is more or less fixed, right? So the width of this container, the one in the background, is probably not going to change. It's not going to be responsive as this application changes, right? It's always going to remain this size. And we have the receive text layer. It's a different size. It's longer than send. So if you were to have padding on these buttons here, you would essentially get something that looks like this, which would be very strange in this case, right? Because you're almost putting more emphasis on receive than send, which you probably don't want to do in this situation. So in that case, I would not use padding because I want the buttons to be the exact same size so that they have the exact same weight, right? So in terms of the user experience. So in that case, I would not want to use. Same thing with this one down here. It's one button, but I always want it to remain the exact same size. And there are cases where I don't have an example right now, but there will be cases maybe on a website landing page where you're not constricted and you want the buttons to kind of flow as you're changing them, right? All right, it would be nice to also see some 3D manipulations. Probably not today, but we're definitely going to get to 3D maybe next class. All right, so now up here, we want some information. And in this particular experience, something like search is a big part of the experience, being able to search for shops and being able to search for wallet and transactions and things like that. So we're going to start that process. And at the top left-hand corner, we may want a search icon. So let's go ahead and hop over to Nucleo. And we can create our own search icon if we need to. But I'm a little bit lazy. These look pretty good. Also, one more time, we can also go to our Icons for Design plugin, type out search. The feather icons always are really nice. Let's drag it back over there. I don't know why it kind of shoots icons wherever it pleases, but yeah, we'll run with it. All right, so that looked pretty good. Now you have to ask yourself when you're designing in situations like this, how much emphasis do you want to put on searching, right? Do you want these icons to stand out, or do you want them to be there when they need to be there, but also kind of blend in when they don't need to be there? Again, it depends on the experience. What exactly are you building? Are you building something that people will absolutely be searching for, or once in a while, right? So in this case, I kind of want it to blend in a little bit. So I'm going to apply this one as a border, but also it's going to be there, right? It's a little bit too large. I'm going to shrink it down a touch. The border size of 3, I'm going to drop it down to 2 and see. Yeah, that looks okay. And then we might want a line that goes across and then maybe some text to let users know what exactly they can search for. So I'm gonna grab the line tool, shortcut key L, and drag one out all the way across. I'll pop it somewhere right about here. I do wanna leave some room on this side, and we're gonna have a notification bell possibly, and possibly some other little bits of information. And I'll apply this same color. I'm probably going to end up dropping the opacity of this line, but we'll see. We'll see how things look. Mohammed's saying it should stand out. Yeah, it depends. Again, it completely depends on the experience, right? And then over here, we might want to type out, want to make this left aligned, search, shops, addresses, transactions. Now for the styling of this, I might want to, definitely going to drop the weight a little bit. Let's try something like medium, and I'm going to bump up the size a little bit just so that even though we're trying to, you know, have it blend in a little bit, it's still got to be large enough that you can read it. 16, that could potentially work. And let's try this color here. That looks pretty good. I might want to bump it up a little bit more, but we'll run with it and see what that looks like. And then over here to the right, part of the search experience, there might be filters, right? So we might want to create a very simple filter. And we already have this icon down here that we actually created earlier, which I might change at some point. So I'm actually going to dive in here, select all these elements, view, hop over here, paste them, and I'm going to rotate this. Now the color, obviously, not going to work, right? We also want to make it a little bit longer and larger. And we're going to, so for the ellipse, actually all of this we're going to apply as border. Whoops. Apply as border. And then this guy here, we want to set the fill to this background color. All right, make it a little bit thicker. Let's try 2. And this one as well. Grab this line. We'll probably want to make the line match, so we'll set that to 2. That's looking a little bit better. I might want to separate them just a little bit. There we go. And we can maybe offset them a touch, just to give it a little bit of style. And I'm going to make sure to grab all these elements, group them, and call this filters. All right. Perfect. And if I zoom out, I can make sure that everything's aligned really nicely. Just like that. There we go. Beautiful. All right. Bravo. Oh, Jesse did a video on Bravo. That's awesome. Yeah, definitely go check out Jesse's videos. He does some pretty good stuff. All right, now over here, I might want a very simple notification bell. So let's try Nucleo, and let's type out bell. Font awesome, always has some amazing, ooh, this one's fun. That one is definitely fun. If we want to go more simple, we can do something like this. We're probably going to go a little bit simple. I'm going to paste that in there. I'm going to apply this border color. Oh, it's fill. Click. There we go. Make sure everything lines up. Move it over to the right. We don't want it too close to that search experience. And then maybe at the top right-hand corner, just to show what maybe a notification might look like, I'm going to grab the ellipse tool, shortcut key E, draw one out. We're going to set the fill to a nice reddish pink. And then I'm going to set the border to this background color. And the reason I'm doing that is so that I can overlap this, and it almost cuts out a nice little hole from this notification bell. It's a fun little trick, right? If you don't want to deal with Boolean objects and stuff like that. Perfect. All right, I'm going to group these, call this, this is notifications. And that's looking pretty good. Now I do want to make sure that this is moved over, but of course, you know, once we start adding more content, it'll be a little bit easier to line some of this stuff up. All right, we will leave it at that for now. We will probably have to revisit that. But I do want to make sure that I have all of this selected call this search. And once we start adding stacking to this entire section, it'll allow us to swap the position of some of these elements. And just looking at this from afar, I'm gonna bump this up in size a little bit. That could work. All right, so now down below here, we may want some maybe quick snapshots of what exactly is going on in this, you have a lot going on in this application. You may want a quick glimpse, words are hard. I need more coffee, of, what exactly your wallet balance might be, or how many rewards you have, or staking and that sort of thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and drag out an ellipse or a rectangle. And I want to make sure that we have all of our positioning lined up. So let's go for, do you want to go 32? Is 32 too much? That's the big question, right? What do you all think in the chat? I think 32 might be too squishy. I want some nice padding on the sides. So let's actually start, let's try 40. And on this side, we want 40 as well from this container. There we go. And maybe to help me out, I'm going to drag out some guides on this side as well. And now I can start really focusing on lining all this information up. That side looks pretty good. It's almost there. Boop. Wonderful. All right. Now, at the top here, there are many different ways you can display quick information, depending on what it is. If the information is very similar, you may want to put it inside of one container. If it's very different, you may want to separate it in separate containers. So I right now have one container going across, and I may want to round out the corners a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and round it out. Let's try 16 pixels. And I'm thinking I want 3 containers going across. So in this case, I do have one all the way across this container. I'm going to actually go into the properties inspector and divide by 3, just like that. And I can give it a little bit of padding as well. So I can just minus, let's say 8. Whoops, minus 8. There we go. So now, eventually, when the time comes, we will be able to drag out, right, 2 more, and it'll line up perfectly. But let's go ahead and start designing what this one looks like. I am going to keep the fill at white because I found when designing dashboards, solid colors as close to white and black as you can get make it much easier to digest the information, especially on a dashboard like this where there's going to be a lot of information, right? I'm going to stick with white. And I may also have a shadow underneath, but I may get a little bit fancy with this. We're going to get fancy. So below this shape, I'm going to duplicate this downwards. I'm actually going to move it behind, and we're going to add a gradient. And each of these 3 blocks is going to have a slightly different gradient. So I'm going to hop into my fill. I'm going to go to my linear gradient. We're going to do a nice horizontal gradient across this container. And maybe the container, the color on the far left, we'll start with a purple. And on the far right, we're going to do an orange. Now, obviously, this looks a bit strange, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to add a few additional stops. So I might want to transition here to a nice pink, and then transition here to more of a darker orange or red, just to give this a nice, fun gradient behind this shape. Right? That looks fun. And then behind this, we may want a shadow just to separate this from the background. So I'm going to enable a shadow right down here, and I'm going to bump it on the y-axis quite a bit. I'm going to blur it quite a bit, right? And then I'm going to add a little bit of blue in here. Something like that, right? Maybe I'll shift it up a little bit. Bluish purple. I'm going to bump it down a little bit more. Let's try about 20, and then blur it a touch more, right? So if we take a look, we have a nice, subtle, blurry gradient. And Cornell's saying I'd apply some blur to this gradient. Yeah, I've thought about that. And actually in the dark version that I haven't posted publicly yet, I do actually have this like glowing gradient behind where I did apply an object blur to it. It doesn't really work on a lighter background. That's why I'm not going to do it here. But I'm going to bump this up just a touch. So we have a nice subtle gradient behind it and then a shadow underneath it that kind of brings it all home and separates it from the background. And let's try 15. because again, we want something nice and subtle. All right, that could work for now. We can definitely change it, but we're gonna keep it at that. Now, on the inside of this, we may want some quick information about maybe your rewards. So I'm gonna grab the text tool and rewards snapshot. Now for this header, it is a header, so we may want to go back to Josephine Sands for that. And you remember, we did use that over here, right? I'm gonna actually move this up a little bit, it's bothering me. And we can add this as a character style. Now this one in particular might be a little bit too large for this section here, but we can definitely try it. It's not bad actually. That could work. That will do. And then down below, we may want to display some of that information. So maybe how many rewards are available, how much is pending, and then maybe a button to quickly draw your available rewards. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this downwards, and this might be, I don't know, let's say 25 that available. Now we're going to make some changes to this typeface because this is not a header. We're going to go back to Avenir next. And we probably don't need all caps for this. Now we may want to emphasize the 25, 29 and have available kind of drift off into the wind, right? So 25, 29 looks pretty good at bold. Available, we might want to bump this down to maybe medium. We could possibly experiment with different colors, maybe a lighter color, possibly. It's not bad, but we're gonna keep it simple. We're just gonna leave it at this. And then over to the left, we may want, let's see if there's any, oh, this is a fun icon. This one right here from something. I'm not sure which library this is from, but that one could work. Paste that in there. Move it over to the left-hand side. Apply our color here. And I did not save this color, because I did make tweaks to it, so I'm going to go ahead and add that. All right, let's see what that looks like. Not bad. It might be a bit large, this particular icon, so I'm going to drop the size a touch. There we go. That could do. I might add a little bit of padding on the left-hand side, but let's go ahead and do one more, which might be how much is pending. So this, we might want to do, let's say, a clock. And this one from Font Awesome looks pretty awesome. Shrink that down. Let's apply this color. And we want to make sure that it lines up really nicely. Perfect. Duplicate this. And here, maybe there's $5.24. And then this will be pending. I'm going to organize some of this. I'm going to group this. This will be called pending. And then these two will be called available. Oops. Available. And I can put these in a stack and call this, let's say, info. And that will allow me to swap the position of these, just in case maybe they decide that we want to focus on pending for whatever reason. Probably wouldn't make sense. Or if I started the process with the available at the bottom, I can very easily just grab them and swap them around. And then the final thing we might want to add right here at the bottom is a quick button. So you can quickly take out the money that might be available or whatever that button might be. And it may change based on the different cards. So I'm going to grab the ellipse tool. And what we can also do, if we have a button that's similar in style, we can turn that into a component, but we may not at the moment. So I'm going to drag one out and we have about 17. Let's actually go for 16 pixels on the left and around 16 pixels, because I use some math equations to make this smaller. We do have some fractional pixels. I could just actually go ahead and drop that a touch. And then the same thing with this one. And then I can make sure that these, whoops, align to the grid just in case they got shifted a little bit. Nope, looks pretty good. All right, so we've got 15. Let's go for 16 and then 16 there. So we will definitely need a little bit more room. So I'm actually going to go ahead and make this a little bit longer. Oops, select both of these. Phew. There we go. Move this down. And this is another opportunity that you can definitely use padding as well. But this kind of goes back to what someone was asking, when do you use padding and when don't use padding. In this case, I would not want to use padding because these particular boxes are going to be the exact same size across this design. So I would not use padding in this case. So this one, I'm going to round out the corners just a little bit. And I do like the style of this particular button. So I'm going to copy this, paste it over here, right click, paste appearance, or you can use the shortcut. And we'll type out something like quick withdraw. And we will drop it in size, drop it in weight. That's not bad. Looking pretty good. You might want to drop this. Maybe actually let's choose this one over here, just so it doesn't stand out too much. And I still think we may need some work here. I'm going to drop this in size a touch. Drop this in size a touch. Just so that we can fit everything in there. And we also don't necessarily want to keep enlarging this box because there's going to be a lot of information on this dashboard and we don't want to take up too much room. All right, so that'll give us a little bit more room to make this button a touch larger. And that could work. All right. I still don't know if we do have more room on this side, right? So maybe we'll move this over. Let's do 24. Just so we have some nice padding, right? And that should do. All right, very good. Now there's some of the gradient that's popping over. That looks a bit better. Okay, so this one is looking pretty good. I'm gonna make sure to group this and group all this information. This will be called rewards. And I also want to place this into a larger group, Command and Control G, and this is going to be called, let's say, top section, or maybe snapshot, right? And then with that done, I'm going to turn a stack on within the properties inspector. It's going to define it as horizontal. And now I can dive in here and duplicate and duplicate. So I have these going across. I can make this longer. So it snaps perfectly. And now I have 3 of these particular containers going across. Now, of course, you can also, turn this into a component if you want to, if you think that they're going to be similar enough that you want to keep the style. Now, in this case, we're going to be changing the gradient. We're going to be changing a few different things. So I'm going to stay away from a component just at the moment, but we can definitely do that. Now, for this one, I'm going to change up the gradient a little bit. Maybe here we'll start with a bright greenish blue, and we'll transition to maybe a yellowish, and then we'll try maybe a pink, and then a dark purple, right? Just to mix it up a little bit. There we go. Looking good. And then maybe this one over here, we'll start it off at red, and then transition to more of a pink. You really got to experiment with these gradients. You could really spend hours just tweaking your gradients. And they're not perfect, but I think they'll do. Cara is saying, I channeled Howard's color style / gradients in a layout for our class. Yes. I'm glad I am influencing your color choices. Hopefully they turned out well. All right, now this one might be something like pending rewards. Right, and then down below we might want the button view more. And we'll get to the information in the center in a moment. And then here might be your staking snapshot. Manage your stake. There we go. And then, okay, so in here, instead of this information, we may want to show, maybe which stores are pending for this particular section. So I'm going to delete this, and we're going to drag out an ellipse, and maybe we'll just have 2 of them being displayed. And maybe over to the right, we'll do, let's say, DoorDash. And I can copy this layer style over here if I don't have it, or character style if I don't have it saved, which I should probably save it, but it looks like it's the same one. And I'll make sure this is bold. And then over to the right, we're going to have how much is pending. Maybe we'll drop that to demi bold. Just like that. And then we can use a repeat grid as well. So I'm going to select all this information, repeat grid right at the top, Command and Control R, boop, and I'll just have one more like I mentioned. So we'll just have 2 of them. And maybe this one might be eBay, and maybe you have $14 and I don't know, 5 cents pending. And now we can hop over to Finder. I do have a DoorDash logo and an eBay logo. Make that larger. And turn off the border. All right, I'm gonna move this up a little bit so it's more centered, beautiful. And then over to the right, this is gonna be information about staking. Now, if you're not familiar with staking in cryptocurrency, it's a long conversation, but basically you can lock up some of your coin with the company, and every week or every month you get a small percentage back, which is always fun, right? So this over here might be how many coins you have, right? And then in this case, it would be STMX, and then staked. And then down here, how much might be pending next week, for example, right? There we go. And this icon probably works, right? But this one over here, I mean, maybe it does, but it probably doesn't. And if you remember, over here in the menu, we use this fun little stake icon for staking. Even though it has nothing to do with the steak that you eat, I think it's kind of fun, right? It's a silly little thing. So let's go ahead and type out stake. I do want the line-based version of that icon. So I'll copy that, pop it in here. Make it nice and small. That looks pretty good. I'm gonna set the border color. Get rid of this one. And I'm gonna drop this to 1. Oops. There we go. And just like that, we now have 3 of our snapshots going across our document. Now, what I'm noticing is that I messed up at some point somewhere. Oh, I moved something around. That would be what's going on. I was gonna say, I know I aligned things properly, but the background looks like it got a little bit shifted over, but now that should work a lot better. We got 40 and 38 almost. We can always work on that later, right? All right, now the next section we might want to add is right down below. We may want a much larger section. And in this case, it might be which new shops are available and have been added. So I'm actually going to drag out a rectangle across, whoops. I am inside of the snapshots group, which has a stack enabled. I don't want to do that. I'm going to grab the rectangle, draw one across. And I do like the style and the rounded corners of this. So I'm going to just paste that. And I'm going to add another shadow. Now it's going to be a little bit different than this one up here. Not much different, but if I were to copy the style on this particular shape, it would bring, actually, we could do that. Paste it there and just get rid of the gradient, right? That could work. I suppose that'll do. And maybe for this one, we might want to pull the shadow out quite a bit more, because it might overlay on top of the ones below it, just to give it a little bit of style. May not be necessary, but something you can do, right? And this might be newly added shops. And then for these particular sections, since they will be, giving a quick glimpse into what shops have been added, you may want also a way to see more. So over here to the right, you can duplicate this over and we'll just do something like view more. I'm going to drop this to, let's try 12. That could work. And then we may want an arrow. So I'm going to go ahead and activate my square grid. Click, click, and click. Very simple arrow, right? Apply border color. Let's round out the corners and the joints. Make it a little bit thicker, possibly. Make it a little bit, whoops. A little bit smaller. That could do. And if we want to get really specific, you can go ahead and turn your guides on. And let's say we want to drag out another guide that lines up with this button right here. And then you can use that to line up these other elements. that could do. And possibly we might want to drop the opacity of these just so that doesn't stand out too much. Maybe. We'll see. All right. 1 Ethereum is now worth 1730. Oh my gosh, crazy. All right, so what we're going to do here is we're going to just display in nice large format some of the other shops or some of the newer shops that have been added. So I'm going to grab the ellipse, draw one out, a nice large ellipse. And underneath here, we may want, let's say, the shop name. And for this, we're going to go back to Avenir next. I am going to center it. Bold could work. Size-wise, I think that could work as well. And then right below, maybe how much cash back you can potentially get from shopping at this place, right? Up to, let's say, 2.8 to whatever, 2.6%. And this, we might want to drop in size a little bit because it is secondary information. We're going to drop it in weight as well. And maybe since it has to do with cash back, we may want to shift it to a nice green color. And I think that could work for the light version of this application. On the darker version, it's very difficult to introduce colors. It's very tricky. Now, this looks a little bit hard to see. So I might want to darken this a touch. It might be too small too. Yeah, that's a bit better. I think the bold and the medium separated enough. We probably don't have to really play around with the size too much. All right, so we have those, and this I'm going to just set to a gray for now. And I'm going to make sure to grab all these elements, put them into a repeat grid, and stretch them on out. Now, one thing we can also do, if we want to give a nice amount of space in between each one of these, let's try 32 pixels, is we can add, we can add additional ones that kind of fly off. So maybe there's a few extra shops over here, and maybe in this section, they can scroll back and forth to see a few extra ones, right? So with that done, what we want to do is turn on a vertical scroll group, horizontal scroll group, that's the one, inside the properties inspector. And I'm going to make sure to snap these handles to this container. Now I know I'm not getting into components just yet, but next masterclass, I will definitely talk about components inside of repeat grids. I apologize, Miroslav, but I kind of showed it yesterday during the daily challenge. So now if I press play, you can scroll to the left and to the right. And because it's a repeat grid, we can just grab some images like this, pop them directly in, and it's going to automatically fill everything up. And it just makes things look so much cleaner, right? When you have actual content in there. And then finally, we're not going to have time to fill in this information, but down below, let me actually make sure to group some of these. And new shops. Down below, we are going to have 2 additional boxes right down here. So with the rectangle one more time, I'm actually going to snap it to the center and then just bring it back a little bit. Let's see. So we have at the top, we have about 40. So we want 40 as well. And then I'm going to bring it back by about 8 pixels. And I'm going to copy this, paste it. And for this one, I'm going to bring back the shadow quite a bit, so it's nice and subtle. And then we'll eventually have another one right over here. So everything lines up really nicely, right? We have 40 pixels around, we have 8 pixels or 16 pixels in between these and these as well. And it just feels much nicer, right? If you take a quick look, everything just has a flow to it. And then as we start adding new content, maybe down here, this might be debit transactions. And then over here might be, look at your staking. And if you want to, maybe the staking section doesn't need a container that's this wide, right? So you can go ahead and maybe pull this back a little bit so it's a more narrow container, and then just move this one over. And what you can also do is, once you actually start organizing some of this, I'm going to group this, staking, and then group these 2, debit. Pop both of these in a group, which I'll call bottom, and then turn on a stack. And now, right, right, you can do things like that and pull this on out. That's a little bit better, right? So you can break the bounds a little bit if you think that this section here needs more space than this section over here. So it's completely up to you. I'm not sure which direction we're going to go in just yet, but we can do that, right? All right, that's looking pretty good. And maybe very quickly I can grab this repeat grid, pop it down here. This might be too small. Like in this case, we may want to enlarge some of this information. So I'm going to ungroup this grid just for now. Grab this, make it longer. This I can probably bump up in size a little bit now that we have more space. And this one's all going to be all the way over to the right. And then, just like we did before, repeat grid and drag a few out, right? And it really depends on how many you want to be displayed in this particular section, right? But that is just about going to wrap it up for today's masterclass. We did accomplish quite a bit. We basically built out this entire section over here and this section down at the bottom. So the next masterclass, maybe I'll take a break from this particular dashboard. We'll do something else next masterclass. We'll see. If you do have specific suggestions, definitely shoot it to me on Twitter @Pinsky so I can see it. Stick around. We've got Kyle T. Webster, I believe, coming up in just a few minutes with his illustration masterclass. Always a wonderful class. And then I'll be back after that to wrap up the latest daily creative challenge. Thanks so much, everyone, and I'll see you all soon.